When we say that fever is of long duration, we consider that fever has passed the 7 days. So we have discussed how best we can approach uh, in a case when there is a fever of long duration that is more than 7 days. And again here, if it would have been a physical meeting, I would have liked to interact with you. But here I straightway go with the presentation that which are the most common causes of fever of 7 days. So if you look at the textbook, I think there were a number of causes like infective, non-infective, inflammatory, neoplastic, so forth and so forth. But here I would like to just touch upon our day-to-day problems where the a fever can be of a long duration. And here again also, like our fever of short duration, the infection is the most common. And this infection can be a viral or a bacterial. And as you know, friends, in case of viral fever, most of the time, fever would subside by simple symptomatic treatment within day 5 or at the most by 5 7 days. But in a case of viral fever, when fever persists for more than 7 days, you have to think of certain viruses or you have to think of certain post-viral complication. And the common thing is a post-viral infection. Like in the case of measles, we have got the post-measles bronchopneumonia or pneumonia as a common occurrence. Of course, we do not see now that we used to see in the past, but it is one of the most important that any viral infection where it gets complicated, fever persists for more than 7 days. However, there are certain viruses where fever is longer of duration. That is H1N1, adenovirus, and of course Epstein-Barr virus. It is not that it is missing in this. I would like to include, but Epstein-Barr virus is a common cause where the fever is of more than 7 days. And in any immunocompromised site like HIV, a simple-looking viral fever may have an unheralded prolonged course. So these are the common viral infection which are associated with fever more than 7 days. As far as the bacterial infection is concerned, our old friend that is a typhoid fever, tuberculosis and brucella, these are the common situation that we come in a day-to-day practice. But often, which is underdiagnosed and often which is missed or not considered is a subacute or chronic sinusitis where fever persists for more than 7 days. Of course, a hidden abscess anywhere in the body, which can be picked up with the help of the good imaging, probably is a common cause for more than 7 days. Some uncommon situation, or at least I would say not that uncommon, will be infective endocarditis. And sometimes when the bacterial diagnosis is certain, but after the infection has taken care of with the help of antibiotic and proper management, sometimes there's some post-bacterial complication are there. And this complication may be immunological or a non-immunological complication. And it includes a condition like HLH, resistance, drug resistance, or even immunocompromised. So here's also the in immunocompromised child, when the bacterial infection is simple, a simple sign of pulmonary infection can have a prolonged undulating course and present a fever of more than 7 days. As far as the non-infective causes are concerned, we have got the various vasculitis syndrome, which includes small vessel, medium vessel, and large vessel vasculitis. We have got some rheumatoid conditions like psoriasis and SLA. We have got the neoplasia like lymphoma and leukemias. A drug fever, usually when the drug is discontinued, the fever will subside. Usually the child are not that toxic, not that ill, but sometimes we have to consider drug fever. A periodic fever syndrome, we have got a separate module in this. Again, they have got the fever of long duration. Endocrine cause includes thyrotoxicosis, not that common. And in an adolescent child, probably a factitious fever is most common, where the child is usually eating well, playing well, but only they complain of fever, fever, and fever. But if you observe the child, probably there may not be any documented fever. That is all about the factitious fever. So out of this, the infective causes still are 60 to 70% and include both viral as well as bacterial infection. Remaining 20 to 25% of the cases will be of a non-infective causes, and in 3 to 5% of cases, probably only God knows why the child is running fever for a longer time. So these are the situations as per the common causes of concern. Now, when the fever persists for more than 1 week, we have to think of a non-infective causes more and more, and the causes, infective causes, become less and less common because as a presenting feature, a fever as a presenting feature. So if the fever persists beyond 1 week, the chances of non-infective cases becoming more and more, and chances of infective causes become less and less. Now, in When there is a fever of 7 duration, there are two important situations. Number one, we may have a presumptive or a established clinical diagnosis, and second case, we may not have a established diagnosis itself. So in both the cases, your approach is going to be different. Now, suppose we have got a 4-year-old child who has got a left lower zone pneumonia, was rightly given on ceftriaxone, but in spite of that, fever persists for more than 7 days, in spite of the correct antibiotic. So here, the diagnosis is certain. We have got the diagnosis of the left lower zone pneumonia. Still, fever persists in spite of the correct antibiotic. And in this situation, we have to think of the post-bacterial complication like empyema in a case of pneumonia, or it may be a drug agent like MRSA, or it may be a different bug like tuberculosis or the mycoplasma. So these are the situations where a pneumonia can have a prolonged fever in spite of the correct situation. A second situation, again here, a culture positive typhoid, a 6-year-old boy was treated with ceftriaxone but still fever continued. So here also the diagnosis of typhoid fever, culture proven diagnosis is there, but still the fever continues in spite of therapy. In that case, we have to look for the some local problem like thrombophlebitis at the site of the IV injection, or it can be an immune-mediated fever, which is common in the second week, but it is usually a biphasic. Child is usually non-toxic, and sometimes a very sick child, when there is a bicytopenia and high ferritin, you have to think of a complication like HLH. And sometimes in an immunocompromised child, also fever persists more than even a simple typhoid fever, where there is a no response to a correct antibiotic therapy. And the third situation is common day to day, that is a measles, where usually in a typical case of the measles, the fever subsides when the rash appears all over the body. But sometimes after the rash has appeared, after the child has become well for a couple of days, again the child starts running fever, which persists for more than 7 days. And these are the situations that you have to consider that you're probably looking with a post-measles complication in the form of pneumonia or a bronchopneumonia. So these are the situations where the diagnosis is certain, but in spite of the correct therapy, the fever persists. Therefore, if this is the situation, you have to remember this inverted triangle. So first and important thing, you have to revise or relook or confirm the diagnosis. Number one, if the diagnosis is confirmed, then you have to think of the complication. Just do not go on adding the antibiotic. Rule out the complication. Treat the complication. Your fever will subside in no time. Then it may be in the case. Examples are empyema in case of pneumonia, or it can be a subdural empyema in case of meningitis, or in a case of typhoid fever, or when the child is on intravenous therapy, it may be a thrombophlebitis, it can be a drug fever, or it can be HLH in a simple fever, in a simple infection like dengue or enteric fever, and sometimes it may be a immune response syndrome or a immune-mediated fever in case of enteric fever. So these are very important slide which shows that a simple complication, a simple infection can have a complication and fever persists for more than 7 days. You have taken care of complication, think of the drug resistance, and if drug resistance is ruled out, then you have to think of the coexisting infection. Now, in a case of fever of long duration, which are the red flag signs? And this is very important. These are the cases which require upfront investigation and evaluation. So if the child has a prolonged appetite, if there is a weight loss, if there is presence of rash, if there is focal complaints, or if there is organomegaly in the form of hepatosplenomegaly or lymphadenopathy, then you have to upfront investigate the child. Similarly, if there is clubbing, which indicates a sign of chronicity, is again a sign of it's a red flag sign and requires thorough investigation. Similarly, presence of focal sign like a huge hepatomegaly, huge splenomegaly, lymphadenopathy, some eschar, all these are the situations where you have to be very careful. So friends, if there is a fever which is more than 7 days, the most important thing you can do is document. If the fever has been documented, then you must have taken proper history and thorough clinical examination. Most of the time, routine investigations are done, which are also not going to be helpful. In this situation, you have to relook at the general condition, relook at the history, rephrase the history, go in the details of the original duration progress. Often we forget to take the history of animal bite, animal exposure, and travel history, and these are the situations where the genetic diseases are often missed. So always take into consideration of that. Do a thorough clinical examination, reassess your clinical finding, and by chance you may get a new sign or a new localizing sign. And if you're fortunate enough to get a new sign or no new localizing focus, then you have to investigate a targeted investigation in that line. Suppose a child who has found eschar was previously missed or developed eschar in the course of the illness, probably you have to investigate in the line of the scrub type. Similarly, a meningeal sign which was not existing first now reappear. Now meningeal signs appear. Probably it may be dealing with a case of subacute meningitis, maybe tuberculosis meningitis. Similarly, lymphadenopathy or organomegaly or a rash or a arthralgia or arthritis may evolve during the course of your assessment, and these are the focal sign or symptoms are sufficient to give a clue us for the targeted investigation. But sometimes this type of the new localizing sign is not available, and if this is not available, then you have to treat it as a case of fever of unknown origin, and probably these are the situation where a specialist opinion or second opinion may be needed. So now let us find out what is fever of unknown origin. And as rightly mentioned in the first module, that fever of unknown origin children where there is a documented fever of 101 degree Fahrenheit at least once in a day for more than 8 days, and this fever persists without apparent diagnosis even after initial outpatient evaluation as well as inpatient evaluation, including lab investigation. So a documented fever of 101 at least once in a day for more than 7 days. Child has been evaluated thoroughly, both OPD as well as indoor if needed, including some of the laboratory investigation, and this constitutes a case of fever of unknown origin. And when the fever persists for more than 7 days, the infection becomes less and less common, and non-infectious causes are more common. Now, when you suspect a non-infectious cause, so if there is a longer the duration, the infection becomes unlikely. Similarly, if there is a lymphadenopathy, if there is an organomegaly, if there is a lymphadenopathy, if there is organomegaly, if there is a pallor, then it can occur with infection, or at the same time, it can occur with a non-infectious condition like neoplasm and rheumatoid condition. Third one, if there is a presence of rash, then you have to consider some rheumatological disorder as well as zoonotic disorder. And sometimes, if there is presence of vasculitis features, then again, probably we are dealing with a non-infectious cause. Now, let us find out what are the features of vasculitis. And as the name suggests, there is inflammation of the blood vessels, which may be a venous or it may be a arterial vasculitis, which may involve a small vessel, medium vessel, or the large vessel. And most of the time, this vasculitis will present as a fever, weight loss, and a night sweat. A palpable purpura is one of the most important feature of the vasculitis. Mononeuritic multiplex is known. Sometimes what is more common in our day-to-day practice is arthralgia, arthritis, muscle pain, and corticulation. As far as respiratory symptoms are concerned, sinusitis, unexplained epistaxis, or sometimes undiagnosed pulmonary infiltrates. Like classical example is a periarteritis nodosa, where the infiltrates are there and fever of long duration will be there. As far as GI symptoms concerned, the abdominal pain because of the involvement of the mesenteric vessel, which causes ischemia of the mesentery, and the child will have an acute pain presenting as a picture of vasculitis. And we do not have to forget our kidney, which is commonly organ which is affected in case of vascular syndrome. The classical example is a lupus nephritis. So these are the situations you have to look for when you have the features of vasculitis. You have to think of the non-infective condition. So to summarize this part of the talk, it is a history. Most important. We have got Dr. Very senior person, Dr. Srinivasan and Gunasi, and they will, I think, gives a proper emphasis to the student about the history. So there is you have to reassess in a case of PO. You have to reassess the history. You have to rephrase the same question again and again. Then and then you will be able to bring out something from the parents. So reassess the history. Sometimes you have to rephrase the same question again and again. Similarly, as far as the physical examination, it should be a thorough clinical examination from head to heel, and not a single exam. It should be a sequential and serial and repeated investigation. And you have to make the chart of the this physical finding. So then and then you have to find out whether new sign has evolved or not during the course of the illness. Similarly, these are the cases which require a repeated investigation, and so the serial trend of the recurrent. What is the trend of WBC? What is the trend of the platelet? What is what is the trend of the hemoglobin? Whether the albumin is falling or not. So all these are very important as far as the fever of unknown origin is concerned. And once from these three aspects, repeated history, serial physical examination, and serial records of the basic investigation, you may find some clue, and this will lead to a targeted investigation, which may often become a invasive one like a biopsy, or a non-invasive like a imaging like a CT scan, PET scan, or MRI. Similarly, it is very important to have a fever diary. I think this is the most simple thing which is missed in our day-to-day practice. And this fever diary will tell you what is the response to the paracetamol, how the child is behaving during interfebrile period, if the fever persists for longer time. But if the interfebrile period child is not sick, probably you are dealing with a case of immune-mediated fever. As against this, if the fever is longer but the child is sick, probably you are dealing with some infection or some dreaded condition like leukemia. Similarly, our fever trend by day 3, day 4, that is day 7 or 7, whether it's biphasic, triphasic, all have a different dimension as far as the differential diagnosis is concerned. A child who appears ill or develop any sign during the febrile illness is very important. The child or juvenile rheumatoid arthritis will have evanescent trace. Child becomes more irritable at the time of fever. Child who has got the Kawasaki disease is extremely irritable at the height of the fever. So this will sit. On the other hand, if the child, the constitutional symptoms do not improve, even if the child becomes afebrile, that probably indicates that you are dealing with some serious systemic disorder like acute lymphatic leukemia. A growth monitoring, especially a weight loss, is very important, and therefore always have a growth chart. It will be an important tool to diagnose, important tool to come to a diagnosis. And similarly, a record or diary of the serial lab parameter are equally important. Sometimes the workup is required as an indoor patient. So which are the situations where indoor evaluation is required? So if you are dealing with a sick child, which requires some stabilization, if there is a presence of red flag sign, which require evaluation upfront, if there is clinical deterioration, if the close follow-up is not possible, if there is possible child abuse, if there is a need for a biopsy so procedure like biopsy, CSF examination, or pleural tapping, or if there is a need for the re-evaluation frequently during the course of the illness, probably you have to admit the child, and this child requires evaluation as an indoor case. So with this basic, let us now have a 3 or 4 cases quickly. A case 1, a 5-year-old child, fever of 20 days duration, which was high grade with chills 102 of 103 degree. And if you see that there is partial response to paracetamol, but at the same time, interfebrile period, child is not direct sick. So here, the first 3 lines are very important. So the even if the child has a fever of 3 weeks duration, there is a partial response therapy, but the child is not that sick. So probably we are not looking at a simple viral infection. At the same time, it may not be a simple routine bacterial infection, because otherwise the child would have become a very sick child. There was a vague abdominal pain, there was body ache and backache, and child was vaccinated as per the National Basic Program. Vitals were normal. Child was hospitalized before 10 days for 3 days and treated with IV ceftriaxone, IV fluid, followed by cefixime for over 10 days. So from the history, it seems that child has been treated as a case of enteric fever. So in this case, the possibility, of course, it can be enteric fever. UTI becomes less likely because the child should have responded to this 10 days course of the antibiotic. Still, let us consider that it may be a drug resistant UTI. It can be tuberculosis, of course. Any fever which persists for more than 2 weeks, it's a cause of concern. Similarly, a brucella can occur, hidden abscess, and it can be a non-infectious cause. But the treatment which was done outside, hemoglobin 10.6, total count 4800, PCV 31%, platelets slightly low 1.3, dengue seronegative, Vidal, O and H are non-contributing. Of course, as a routine now, IFP does not recommend to do a serum Vidal. Only we bang on the blood culture, which was done outside, but again it was negative, and XHS was normal. Sonography was mild hepatosplenomegaly, consistent with diagnosis of typhoid fever and clinical correlation otherwise. So here again, my plea to that we cannot diagnose typhoid fever with the help of sonography. It should be a culture proven diagnosis. So Again, so a lot of irrationality there as far as this investigation practice is concerned. Now, when you examine the child was febrile, non-toxic, vitals were normal. What we found on the examination, there was a hepatosmegaly, there was splenomegaly. However, there was no lymphadenopathy, rash, patetic clubbing, meningeal sign, joint and spine number. So to summarize, we have got a fever of 3 weeks, a non-toxic child who is not responding to paracetamol reasonably. We have got the marked hepatosplenomegaly. Now, we investigated further. Hemoglobin was little drop is there, 10.2, total count almost same. Platelets has gone down further, that is 1.1 lakh. Smears negative, CRP was negative, Vidal negative, dengue serology was negative, HIV was not reacting, X-ray chest again. So repeated investigation almost rule out our routine investigation, and we sent the blood culture, which was also sterile. So with this, we have almost ruled out malaria, we have ruled out enteric fever. There is no clinical background suggestive of infectious mononucleosis. So what we are left with, it can be a tuberculosis, it can be a brucella, or are we dealing with some non-infectious cause? Now, so we investigated further. Repeat X-ray was again negative. Serology of EB virus was done. Again, it was negative. Gastric aspirate for AFP was done twice, which was negative. Repeat blood culture was awaited, and USG was repeated. So first USG, we see that there was a mild hepatosplenomegaly consistent with the diagnosis of enteric fever. So we now thought of doing a, due to there was marked hepatomegaly and splenomegaly, we insisted for the repeat USG. And when did the EPD, how a good sonologist make a difference is this, that on sonography we picked up there was moderate hepatomegaly, there was mild splenomegaly with altered echo pattern and small parenchymal hypoechoic nodule suggestive of microabscesses. So now we have some focus found that there are some microabscesses in the viscera. And when we say there are microabscesses are there, the first thing which comes in our mind is a brucella. However, these microabscesses can occur in tuberculosis, it can occur with typhoid, it can occur with infection of due to any cause, and infective endocarditis and malaria. This is a common cause of microabscesses, but out of this, the commonest one will be a brucella. So friends, here we have a close diagnosis. Either we are dealing with brucella or are we dealing with a case of Cox abdomen. Why? Because both the brucella and TB involve reticuloendothelial system, both have a prolonged fever, both will have hepatosplenomegaly, and both will have a lymphadenopathy. But what is striking is that in case of brucella, there will be arthropathy, there will be microabscesses, and there may be a history of unpasteurized milk consumption. On the other hand, in case of tuberculosis, there may be a history of contact, there may be TB elsewhere in the body, child might have hilar positive or miliary tuberculosis, and instead of microabscesses, there would be presence of granuloma. So this is how we can represent what are we dealing with. So here we have got the microabscesses, though arthropathy is absent, so probably it is more in favor of brucella. So these are the microabscesses you can see on the sonology, and we did a brucella IgM, which was positive, IgG was also positive. So serological diagnosis of brucella was made, and we did a blood culture, and blood culture isolated brucella melitensis, and retrospectively we found that there was history of consumption of unpasteurized milk. So when you are asking for a blood culture for brucella, ask your microbiologist to keep the blood sample at least for 3 to 4 weeks, because brucella are a very slow growing organism. So if your laboratory personnel throws away the sample after 7 or 10 days of observation, probably you may not pick up the brucella. Most of the time we pick up within 10 days, but sometimes it may take little longer, and therefore ask your laboratory personnel to preserve the sample, blood culture sample, and observe it for at least 3 to 4 weeks. That is the message. So message from the first case there, zoonosis, travel history, animal bite, animal exposure, and occupational recreational activity are often missed and should be considered. A thorough, repeated, detailed history is important. So just and thorough, a serial routine investigation like X-ray and USG at times are helpful. So just if you do not have the diagnosis, do not just jump onto higher antibiotic. Do not just jump onto the higher and modern investigation like CT scan, imaging, or endoscopy. Just focus on your basic. Just look at the history, look at the physical examination, and look at the serial investigation. Especially in this case, we have found that repeat USG has further helpful. So there is no need to jump to the advanced guesses. Just stick to the basic. Probably you will find the answer. Second case, a 12-year-old boy who has got a fever, moderate 101 to 102 of 2 weeks duration. But in spite of this just short 2 weeks duration of fever, there is an increase in fatigue, there is generalized body ache, child is not able to play well with the peers, there is breathlessness while climbing upstairs. So the child is ill, child is a tired one child, and probably he's not playing well with the peers. So these are the reflection. So here the message comes: why are fever of 2 weeks should have this much of the weakness? Why the fever is breathless while climbing up the stairs? So here we are probably dealing with some serious illness. So this is enough. These two signs are the red flags, and we have to think of some serious condition. In this situation, there was no headache, no vomiting, there was no abdominal pain, and no skin rash, and significant. There was no family history which was significant. There was past history which was nothing contributory. When we examined the child, he was febrile, some tachycardia was there, height and weight on the 70th percentile, but he looks pale and tired. There was scattered petechiae spot over the leg. There was bilateral cervical lymph node, axillary and inguinal lymph node, liver 1 centimeter, which may be normal, but spleen is 4 centimeters. So here's a child with a ill look, 2 weeks duration, a ill looking, sick looking child, has got the prominent pallor, has petechiae, has lymphadenopathy, and has splenohepatomegaly. So probably what is investigation? Probably here we need to be very, very careful because we are looking with a sick child. And so a febrile, ill-looking child, hepatosplenic limb perfect, we have to find out some serious condition. So here up front, when we did a hemoglobin, it was 9 gram. So the child is anemia. The leukopenia was there. You can see that there was a marked lymphocytosis with a marked neutropenia. So lymphocyte count was 92%, and platelets were just 20,000. And on peripheral smear, we found out the blast cell, which was confirmed by the bone marrow by doing the bone marrow, and was suggestive of acute lymphatic leukemia. So here, friends, message is that whenever there is an ill-looking child, pallor is there, fatigability is there, and the sickness and fatigability is out of proportion to the duration and degree of the fever, think of the serious condition. Always consider organomegaly, lymphadenopathy, and extremes of the count. These are the situations where you have to be very, very alert, and you have to be very, very proactive. And these are the situations where all sort of the investigation are done. So in the first case, we waited, and we just focus on the history, physical examination, and routine investigation. Here, this is the situation. Probably you cannot wait, and this is the case that you have to go for the investigation or some thorough investigation, which may require some modern imaging in the form of MRI or CT, and this shall require a bone marrow. So these are the situations where upfront investigation required, so that you may not be too late. So message here that a sick-looking child, always rule out serious disorder. Second important thing, when you in a case of PO or fever of more than 7 days, you do a bone marrow, always send the bone marrow for the culture as well, because sometimes some of the bacteria are easily picked up with the bone marrow, which are not picked up in the blood. Number two. Number three, always do the bone biopsy itself. Not only go for the bone marrow biopsy, but always go for the bone biopsy in addition to this. The two important things that I want to convey. The third case, a 5-year-old comes with a fever of since 20 days. So here again, fever is 3 weeks. It was high grade at onset, 2 to 3 spikes a day. So there is some typical rhythm is there. So we are dealing with a rhythmic fever because there is a regular 2 to 3 spikes in a day. But in spite of this 20 days of fever, child is well during the interfebrile period, and fever spikes are almost same. So this is very classical of a immune mediated fever, where the child does not look that ill, does not the interfebrile period is not sick, and that is response to paracetamol is very, very good, and the fever comes in a typical rhythmic pattern. Now there are no accompanying symptom, appetite and urine output is maintained, child receives cefixime and antimalarials from the treatment without any response, because probably we are not dealing with an infection. And one of the important feature was that a child irritable during fever. So when the child has an increase, any child is going to be irritable at the during the height of the fever, but when the irritability out of proportion to the degree of fever, probably you have to think of some immune-mediated fever like our Sogia or even a Kawasaki disease can have a irritable child. Now, so in this case, if you look at the diagnosis, it seems to be a immune-mediated fever most likely. It can be bacteria infection like typhoid or brucella, but the fever pattern does not fit with it. It can be TB, but there must be an evidence of a TB elsewhere in the body. But this history again is not fitting in the fever pattern of the TB. However, TB can present in any way in our country. So please do not rule out it. And last one, if we would have a malignant child would have been sicker. So here the child is not sick. On the contrary, interfebrile period is child okay and is eating well, appetite is good. So from this, when we examine the child was vitals are totally stable. And what is important that the fever, child was irritable. At the same time, at the height of the fever, some rash are noticed, and these are known as evanescent rash. When the child becomes febrile, the child will develop rash, which is known as evanescent rash. There was liver 1 centimeter, spleen 2 centimeters soft. There was no lymphadenopathy, joints were normal, and sensorium was totally normal. So we are dealing with a case of immunized fever. And when we examine, there was some anemia was there, leukocytosis were, thrombocytosis there, and ESR was in 3 figure, that is 100. CRP was 76, MT was negative, and on USG there was hepatosplenomegaly, X-ray was normal, and blood culture there was no growth. So the clinical diagnosis was made that because the child has a fever of more than 2 or 3 weeks, there is evanescent rash, there is thrombocytosis, there is leukocytosis, ESR is high, CRP is positive. Probably we are dealing with some immunal condition, and the classical is a SOGIA, which is because of the evanescent rash. So a rhythmic fever, a non-toxic child, and evanescent fever is suggestive a diagnosis of systemic onset juvenile idiopathic arthritis. So let us have a look. I may not go in detail of everything, but if there is a marked lymphocytosis with leukocytosis with marked lymphocytosis, and all other cell lines are affected, dealing with a toxic child, especially when thrombocytopenia, always rule out leukemia. And these are the cases which require upfront investigation. Similarly, absolute neutrophil count and absolute lymphocyte count are more important rather than total count. And when ESR is more than 100, you have to be very, very careful. Similarly, a thrombocytosis, usually we get thrombocytopenia, but thrombocytosis can occur as a non-specific marker of inflammation. It can occur in a case of GIA or Kawasaki disease. Thrombocytopenia is more common with Epstein-Barr virus, CMV, HIV, parvovirus, or leptospira, rickettsial infection, SLE, and Kikuchi. You have to be very, very particular with more than 2 cell lines are affected, or when there is a extremes of the counts, means marked leukopenia, marked leukocytosis, marked thrombocytopenia, marked thrombocytosis. These are the situations you have to be very, very careful. Also look, and when the fever persists more than whether if the child is ill looking, if there is weight loss, if there is anemia, if there is multisystem involvement, if it is a high ESR, probably you are dealing with a non-infective condition. If the ER is previously high, but child is not doing well, child is becoming ill, and if there is rising CRP and falling ESR, it reflects that some fibrinogen consumption is going on in the body, and this classical occurs in a case of HLH, and you do a ferritin, there will be hyperferritinemia. So a rising CRP, falling ESR in a otherwise unwell child, always rule out HLH, which is common with common infection like our dengue, enteric fever, and mycoplasma. So this is very, very common that you have to find out the cause of HLH. So to summarize, if Pyrex is more than 7 days, a good history and clinicalism, a repeated history, a repeat thorough investigation, repeated first line investigation are required. Probably if there is no diagnosis, just do not jump to a what I would say modern gadgets like MRI, endoscopy, or CT. Just again relook at the history, repeat the basic investigation. Sometimes you may get to find a clue, and in that case, you order a specific serological or immunological test, or sometimes you can repeat a non-invasive test like VSG. Always consider travel stay, insect bite, animal exposure, and do not ever forget to look at the local epidemiology. If this second step is also not helping us, then go to the third step. This is a situation where advanced regular like CT scan, MRI, nuclear scan, and PET scan required. Sometimes a tissue diagnosis, all these are also going to be useless, and in that case, a tissue diagnosis required, where we may require splenic puncture, splenic aspiration. We have a bone marrow aspiration. We can do a liver biopsy, and when can do a lymph node biopsy. As well as the lymph node biopsy is concerned, of course, FNSE is the order of the day, especially for tuberculosis diagnosis. But to me, I personally feel that when you're stuck up with the diagnosis, do not just rely on the FNSE, because it has a many false negative. And in that case, go for the excisional biopsy. So that is my another message for that. And whatever you chop out, what you remove, send it for the gram stain, send it for the genesis stain, send it for the culture. And if some fungal infection suspected or some special season, then a special stains are to be asked for. So that is my another important message that I want to say. So if there is a fever, always document. And if there is a primary probable diagnosis or a established diagnosis, then you treat accordingly. And look at the natural history. Look at the natural history of the disease. If you think that your fever is going to persist for more than 72 hours, even longer, counsel the parents and treat it accordingly. But if your natural history of the disease says that this fever should subside, this condition should respond within 4 or 5 days, and still it is fever is persistent, then in that case, you relook at the diagnosis. You're still that your diagnosis is confirmed, then you have to think of the complication or a drug resistance. These are the switch, and for that, a culture of culture is very, very important. But if the probable diagnosis is not evident or the diagnosis is not established in, and then you have to again relook it and find out is whether there is any suggestive anatomical or etiological localization is present or not on thorough repeated investigation. If yes, you have to do a targeted test as per the available focal findings. But if this focal finding is not there, then you have to again go for the repeat investigation. Sometimes invasive investigation, sometimes imaging are required, and sometimes a help from the hematologist, rheumatologist, or a ID consultant may be required. So that is all about my this algorithm. Thank you very much for patience. Thank you Central IIP, Tamil Nadu branch, Madurai, and Pondicherry branches. And thank you all my viewers and my teachers, Dr. Srinivasan sir. Thank you so much.
Very good, sir. Excellent coverage.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful talk.
Thanks, sir.
There is only one question, sir, from you from HLH following dengue or enteric. Can it persist for 7 months?
7 months?
Yes, sir. I'm asking whether secondary HLH persists for months. That's what the question, sir.
Yes, it can. It means, say, most of the time what happens, it depends on the cause of the HLH. Suppose the HLH because of dengue or enteric fever, sometimes the treatment of the primary cause will come out and it may persist for about 15 or 2 to 3 weeks. But for 7 months, at least I have not seen that long. But of course, if it is because of some sogia or rheumatic condition or leukemia, it can persist. But a simple infection, I have not seen any case that long.
There are no further questions, sir.
Okay.
May I now invite the next speaker, okay, our Dr. D. Gunasingh, Professor of Pediatrics, Tomburima Institute of Medical Sciences, Arunachala Pradesh, and past President of IIP Tamil Nadu Chapter, and former Dean of Kanyakumari Medical College, to speak on febrile neonate and fever without focus, an approach.
One minute. Arukmar, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Oh, the slides are not moving anyway.
Now you click on the slide. You click on the slide. Now you have to first open it, sir. First open it.
Yeah,
First open. No. First open, then share it. You cannot share without opening.
Okay. Is it?
Yeah. First you have to open the presentation.
Are you able to see the slide now?
No.
No, sir. No, sir.
Oh.
First open it.
Okay.
Invisible slides.
Sir, hello DIP. Who is from DIP?
Yeah, 1 minute. I will do that.
Did you open your presentation?
Yeah, I'm opening. Yeah, I will do that.